day where I thought, well, it's really not that surprising that I'm so comfortable with all this dark stuff. Because I feel like I kind of grew up on it, and so it's not that different for me. Whereas my children will be, you know, they're so sanitized.
They'll be on the rom-com panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I relate to what you guys are saying. I mean, that's, I think, is just how my mind works. And there's a part of me that feels like if it's going to work that way, and if I have to walk around with this ridiculous brain who's thinking about things like, I would think the exact same thing. I would be like, well, we went to that apartment, and clearly there's something here with it. Like, I would think the same thing, and my mind would go to the what if, and I sort of feel like, well, I may as well get paid for it. If I have to walk around with this thing talking to me like that at preschool drop-off, about like the new mom who maybe has something going on, that, you know, it's like, I may as well, you know, have that work. Like, I feel like, and you're right about the childhood thing, like, I feel like I went to bed each night, like, sure that that I'd be kidnapped, like that, for sure that night, so I should think about the exits and where. But I think at the end of the day, it's sort of like, at least it's a bit of an outlet to kind of channel some of that, so that I'm talking maybe just to readers about that rather than like my husband, who's like, I've had enough of this line of discussion tonight at dinner, right? Which is mediocre because you spend more time like Googling things and learning how to do the things that you're kind of, maybe we could try to do better in our, I mean, it's just, I feel like you kind of gotta go with what you have. And my parents never knew what to do with that. They were always kind of like, 'cause I was also upstairs in my room writing a bunch of stuff, not picking up my room or organizing or whatever my mom wanted me to be doing, but they kind of were just like, all right, well, hopefully one day she'll have a job. And I think they keep thinking, like, they'll often suggest to me jobs that like I could also think about. Like, we drove by my town has a lot of like, I'm an hour north, and there's a lot of like horses and barns. And my mom the other day was like, you know, you always loved horses. Like, do you maybe want to think about like working at the barn now that like the girls are in kindergarten? And I'm like, but I don't have a job. I have a job. You know, they can't believe it, but anyway.
Too dark for the barn. We all look so pleasant and well dressed up here, but we're very dark. Is that what I'm getting from this? To go back to my aforementioned story about the clinical psychologist husband, my book is about a clinical psychologist, and you can't be married or with a clinical psychologist for decades without getting a lot of stories out of them. Mm-hmm. And so what I took away from that stalker story, the woman would proceed to stalk us for 4 horrible years that turned into a nightmare for us that culminated with her ending up in a psychiatric hospital. And but what I took away was not, I want to write a story about a crazy woman who stalked my family. I was interested in the role reversal, and that's what I'm always interested in, is the idea that the clinical psychologist, who's typically in control, suddenly is vulnerable in a situation where a client comes in knowing something about his past that she shouldn't know. So I like to twist the narrative, right? We probably all do in a way. So that's my in. Also, just you know, I have a clinical psychologist walking around my house all day. I'm like, come on. So, and of course, he can't share, of course, any personal information, you know, the HIPAA. But I can learn a lot about the career and the session dynamics. And to speak to what Ashley said for a minute, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I remember walking home from school one day, and this car pulled up, a guy in a convertible, and he said, "Hey, do you want to ride?" And I thought, is that our neighbor? Like, I couldn't tell. I was like, if it is our neighbor, as a good Catholic girl, I'm going to insult him by not taking the ride. So I should take the ride, because my mother will be mad at me if it's our neighbor, Mr. Smith, and I didn't take the ride. But if I take the ride and he's a murderer, that's a problem. I didn't take the ride. And I went home and I told my mom, I was like, this guy just offered me a ride. And she's like, oh, don't take the ride. And that was it. That was it. Could you imagine now if your kid came home and said, this guy, you'd be like, hello, police, right? Yeah. So anyway, different times, right? Different times.
I actually haven't really considered genre. That's not like something that I think a lot about before writing books. I'll just back up and say, so I went to grad school here and I wrote a book for my thesis, and they were like, you should send this book out. So I sent the book out, and everybody said the same thing, which is these characters are great, but nothing happens in your book. And I was like, oh my God. So then I wrote a whole nother book, and everybody said, again, these are great characters. Nothing happens in this book, except for this one agent was like, yeah, that, and if you do these 7,000 changes, I'll consider being your agent. And I remember walking down Fifth Avenue in some pink fry boots that I would never wear today, being like, I've made it. This is gonna be awesome. And I made this 7,000 changes, and then he like didn't even remember me. He was like, yeah, no, this is not gonna work out. So I got so pissed. And I was like, okay, things are gonna happen in this book, because I can't be a nanny living in this hippie commune forever in Brooklyn. So I titled my document like, things are gonna happen, something like that. I think I also wrote just do it on my desk with a Sharpie, an IKEA desk at some point. And I outlined, I made an outline, and then my book had a plot. And after that, I was like, oh, I actually like a really big plot. The things that I remember most, though, from books are not the plot. I remember, like, the quietest moments when the character is taking a sip of water alone in a room. But things have to happen in your book so that people read them. That's what I've learned. And, yeah, and then people call them a thriller when you're done.
We just needed you on the panel.
I know. Big killer.
There are thrilling aspects at the end, so there you go. But Swan is also an artist, by the way, and has this very cool Instagram and TikTok channel where you watch her. She has this graphic novel that just came out called The Bad Mood Book, which, the Bad Mood Book I ended up giving as a party favor to my son's class, and it was like all these curse words. We started like crossing them out, like, and we would like put tape over them, and after like 3 books we had like the whole class coming. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So we just gave them out, and all the parents were like horrified after. And I was like, no, it really works though. It'll get your kid out of a bad mood, because it's like throw the book. And I was like, this is great for kids. And so I was like, you did what?